So once we have our storyboards created, we can jump right into Illustrator. Now, the nature of my storyboards means being so simple and rough, I'm not necessarily going to bring those storyboards right into Illustrator and start working from those. Those were strictly for my own purposes, for my own understanding of what I wanted to do. I'm actually going to create a lot of my artwork right here in Illustrator and using those storyboards as a very rough guide. Now, if you have in your storyboards some very detailed drawings, then you might want to bring those into Illustrator and set those up as a guide layer and start working with creating your artwork right from that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my File drop-down menu, select New, and I'm going to create a new file, a new Illustrator file that has these dimensions. You can set your units to pixels. That'll make things a lot easier. And then just set your width to 720 and your height to 480. Now that is standard North American television viewing ratio, pixel ratio, and that'll be just fine for our purposes. Everything else you can leave as is. And we'll say OK. Now, once you have that, you will have a single artboard, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a background. So I'm going to select my layers, and I'm going to click once on that layer 1, and I'm going to retype this as background. And I'm going to take my rectangle tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle that I like to have my artwork go just a little bit beyond the boundaries of the artboard. That's always just a bit of safety, just in case there's any sort of movement, or if you want to move around a little bit in your scene. In this case, I'm not going to be moving around anyway, so I'm just going to bring that just a little bit beyond my artboard, and I'm going to go to my color panel, and I'm going to change that to a nice intense orange, and I'm going to take away the black outline. The other thing that I have in my background is a halftone dot pattern, and where I've got that was right here in Illustrator's Symbols panel. And I'm going to open up the Symbols panel, and I'm going to go to down here at the bottom. I'll resize this box so we can see it. I'm going to go right down to the bottom of my Symbols panel. I'm going to click here in the Symbol Libraries menu, and there is something called a dot pattern vector pack, and this is a default symbol pattern that is part of all Illustrator programs, and you can see that there is my vector pack, and I believe the vector that I used was this one here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that dot pattern onto my screen. Now by default, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, by default this is a black and a strictly black graphic, and I'm going to rotate this, I think, this direction. I think that'll work for me. Now if I want to color this, you can see I have a bit of an issue. The symbols by default are not something you can edit right here on the screen. There's a couple different ways you can edit it. I can, in the Symbols panel, double click that symbol, and that'll allow me to select all of this and then recolor it. And I can do that just by doing that. Actually, that's probably not the right color. However, this is in fact a way that I'm going to do this. There's a reason for what I'm going to do next, and that is for importation of these symbols into After Effects. After Effects sort of chokes on these symbols for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why. So what we're going to do with this symbol selected, I'm going to go up here to the control panel, and you can see there's a break link button, and I'm just going to do that. I'm going to break link. And what that does, it takes it from being a symbol and turns that into being a vector graphic that we can change to our heart's content. In fact, I'm going to change the color of that, and I'm going to hit Command H so I can see the graphic without all the outlines. And I'm going to change the transparency. I'm going to just bring that down to something like that, just so it's more of a tone on tone. And I'm just going to resize this a little bit, I think, too. Actually, now that I look at it, I don't think this is in fact the graphic that I used. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to do this process all over again. Bear with me. I think this is the one I want to use. And I'm going to again break the link, select my color swatches, and take a nice light orange and bring down the the opacity so that we have a bit more of a tone on tone feature. Now, one thing I should probably mention is now that I've broken the symbol link, all these halftone dots are separate graphics. I'm going to want to group that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to marquee select around all those dots. Make sure I shift select this background graphic so that's not selected, and then just Command G to group it. Okay. Now, the one thing I really want to make sure that I do here, because this will be very important when we import these graphics into After Effects, is that I maintain separate layers. Now, currently, all the halftone dot pattern and the background graphic are all on the same layer. I'm going to want to go here into my layers panel and create a new layer. And with this halftone dot pattern selected, I'm going to drag that dot onto this new layer. And it's not letting me do that for some reason. Let's try that again. There we go. And I'm going to rename that layer to halftone dots. All right. Now we can start putting our type in. Now this is the very first artboard for the very first line, I know who I am. So I'm going to select my type tool and I'm going to type out the words. I got to make sure that I'm going to lock these so that I don't end up doing some work on those layers by accident. And I'm going to take my type tool and I'm going to start typing. I know, let's zoom in a little bit more. There we go. I know who I am. Now I'm going to keep those capitalized, and in fact I'm not going to capitalize them. I'm going to keep each word capitalized, but I'm not going to make everything caps. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the font because I'm going to use Rockwell Extra Bold. Now I find the heavier fonts work well for this type of animation, although I have seen some very light fonts and on Kinetic typography that have worked wonderfully as well. What I need to do now, however, is I need to get each of these words onto its own layer. And again, this is for reasons of importing into After Effects. Everything that you import into After Effects that you intend to animate or change in some way has to be on its own layer. And all these words are going to be coming in separately. So I'm going to have each one of those words come in on its own layer. Now, one thing I want to make sure is I put a exclamation mark at the end of this line. Let's clean this up a little bit. I'm just going to close that. So to put each one of these words onto its own line, I'm just going to highlight it. I have to push Command H again so I can see that what I'm doing. And I'm going to just go Command X to cut that out of its line and paste. Again, highlight this word. I hit Command X to take it out of its line and paste. And finally this word here. Now I'm going to clean this word up a little bit because there's now some spaces in front of that word that need to be deleted. So now all these words are separated. I know who I am. And I'm going to just quickly do a little bit of rearranging here. Now, in fact, I have done all this work before, so I'm not going to redo all this. I'm going to jump to a file that has a lot of this work already done, and that is over here. And you can see there's some subtle differences in what I've established, but essentially it's the same idea. What you'll notice, though, when I open up the Layers panel, is that I have gone through the work of putting each one of these words onto its own layer. I know who I am. And I've also added some splotches, some ink splotches, and those will come on as the words are spoken. As well, I've already created the weather vane graphic. I've also included some scrolls here, and again, those were found in the symbols library within Illustrator. These are default scrolls that are graphics that are part of the Illustrator's graphics library. Okay, well, now once I have that created, I need to create the remaining graphics for all the rest of the lines. This is just the first line here. So the way I'm going to work is I'm going to just zoom out a little bit here, and for the next keyframe, and that's essentially what I'm creating here, are keyframes, is the line, I know who I am, I'm a dude. And that is what I've got. And remember my storyboard, that's how I divided that line up. I'm a dude. And so I would like to maintain the background graphics that I have here currently, meaning the halftone dots and the orange background. But everything else is going to change. I will bring some of these splotches over because I can reuse some of those graphics. And I will be reusing this weather vane as well. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this layers panel, and I'm going to select all the graphics that will be maintained for my next storyboard, and I'll leave those unlocked. Everything else I'm going to lock. So the quote marks, the type, all that stuff is going to be locked up. And so splotch, scroll, I don't think I'm going to use that scroll, and then I'm going to leave the weather vane unlocked and everything else unlocked. Now the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to go over here to my toolbox over here, and I'm going to select the artboard tool, and I'm just going to click once, and you can see I now enter into the artboard tool mode. Everything else is grayed out, but all the graphics that have remained unlocked here, as well as the artboard, are available for me to duplicate. And I can do that by holding down the option button, and you can see my cursor will change to that double-headed arrow, and I'm going to just click and drag out a new version of that artboard. And all the graphics that were unlocked made that version, that trip over. And you can see I have something now called artboard 1 copy, or 02. And so that's my second artboard. I now have a second artboard in the same Illustrator file. I can now go in and start typing out the rest of the words. I'm a dude, and plus create the graphics for that. Now again, I'm not going to go and do all that work right here in this video. I've actually done that work before. But in our next video, we're going to take a look at a completed version of all these keyframes for this animation, and we're going to see how we can arrange those keyframes and then prepare them to be brought into After Effects.